Gregor Clegane probably shouldn't still be alive, yet here he is. He was stabbed with a poisonous spear by Oberyn, and upon examining the body, Qyburn suggests that this poison was somehow doing some black sorcery to make him die in a slow agony, and then when given the body, Qyburn takes him down into the dungeons, and then, several days later, emerges Robert Strong. So what exactly does Qyburn do to the mountain down in the bowels of the Red Keep? Why exactly does he need other blood sources, seemingly taking other people down into the dungeons for whatever experiments he is doing? Well, I think it could actually be related to something that we recently talked about on the channel. Last time we discussed how you make a Melisandre, as in the recipe for this immortal fire-white, fire-other, wizardy-type creature who never has to sleep, doesn't have to eat, or drink. Now, pretty immediately you will recognize some similarities with our boy Robert Strong, who also does not need to eat or drink, and who has taken a vow of silence, in fact, so their condition seems to be much worse off than Melisandre, but overall there is some similarity going on there. So as we discussed in the last video, there is the unused drafts of the A Feast for Crows prologue that were uncovered by G-Steph, who went to the Cushing Library and found all of these in old boxes of George correspondence. So credit to Reddit user G-Steph for all of that fine work. But one of the key things that I found interesting in looking over these drafts was the fact that glass candles had a new power that were not mentioned in the final drafts. So if this is a power that glass candles still have, but was taken out so that it could be revealed later, that would kind of make sense. And in the last video we talked about how directly obvious it was in the prologue chapter itself, how directly tied this was to Melisandre and how she stays alive, because he literally, while describing this, uses the phrase, "the night is dark and full of terrors," and then goes on to explain the glass candles and how they can bind someone to life and how they can help you achieve immortality. So to me, that very directly connects them to Melisandre. But here's the other interesting thing, is in those A Feast for Crows prologue versions, there was mention that there was a lot of glass candles, like one for every Archmaester, and of course they have all of the maesters in training have to sit in front of a glass candle for a night to prove that it can't be lit. And that's how Maester Luwin, for example, learned that magic is gone from the world, because he wanted badly to light the glass candle, and he just couldn't do it, and nobody else can either. But then in the actual published A Feast for Crows, we get Marwyn with a lit glass candle. In this version of the prologue, it was the hooded man, who turns out to be a faceless man. So yeah, I think we have established that George on some level has the idea in his head that glass candles could be used to bind someone to eternal life as long as the flame lasts. And our boy Qyburn was studying at the Citadel and may have had access to glass candles. But even if he didn't have access to glass candles in his past, he has now risen to a very high position of power. Qyburn is currently the Master of Whisperers for Cersei, and if Grand Maester Pycelle, who all of the Archmaesters apparently had glass candles in one version of the prologue, maybe Pycelle had some glass candles sitting around, or surely the Targaryens and their pyromancers had glass candles around the Red Keep somewhere. So I think it is incredibly likely that when Qyburn rose in power, he suddenly gained access to a glass candle, and now that glass candles are burning again, this guy who is connected in some way to Marwyn, right? He could now be using this glass candle to bind Gregor Clegane to life. The mountain, Sir Robert Strong, is bound to life and suffering constantly because of this glass candle. Now, the things that we know about Qyburn really do make this make sense on a lot of different levels. He is very interested in learning about the body, how it works, how living organs work, and he has apparently done experiments on living people. He is asking Cersei for people who could, in theory, be used for blood sacrifices and other experiments. So if those are required to bind Gregor to this glass candle. And the other thing that's mentioned in the prologue is that the bond needs to be strengthened every now and again with blood. So basically you have to have a consistent supply of blood sacrifice to keep these beings alive and trapped in their undeath. In the case of Gregor, he is suffering probably in this undeath and would probably prefer to die. And if you're a fan of the channel, you know that's just another parallel to some of the things that we have been talking about. But if you're new to the channel, I won't spoil the playlist that will be at the end of this video. But yeah, Qyburn definitely seems like that would be a thing that he would do, right? He would tether someone to this undeath so that he could study what happens, he could learn about it purely just for curiosity's sake, if nothing else, right? Upon getting access to a glass candle and given permission to run this experiment, this is definitely an experiment Qyburn would run, assuming he could figure out how to do it, and as the Master of Whispers, he probably has access to a lot of the knowledge that the pyromancers would have, and a lot of secret libraries, assuming any exist. I assume that's what he spends his entire day doing, right? He is basically Dr. Frankenstein, and this is the perfect magical device in world to do Frankenstein-y shenanigans, which he seems to be doing with the mountain. So I think you can really connect these things. But if you believe the theory that I put out last time that Melisandre is in some way bound to a glass candle, then the parallels get even stronger. Melisandre has a flashback to her blood trickling down her thigh at one point, black and smoking. There's some debate. I propose that it's a flashback. Some people could say that it is a thing that's happening to her in the moment, but I think it's a flashback to blood trickling down her thigh, black and smoking. So people have taken this to mean, and in my opinion correctly so, that Melisandre's blood is black. So in her condition, she has black blood. Well, what is the first potential mention of the zombie mountain in the entire series? It is Bran's vision where he sees the warrior with the face of a hound, he sees the one who is golden and armored like the sun, and then looming over them both in armor made of stone is the giant who, when he lifts his visor, there's nothing inside but darkness and thick black blood. Many people have speculated this is the undead zombie mountain, and the black blood would match right up directly with what we see with Melisandre if they are both in the same state of undeath, somehow bound to a glass candle. The other thing that I speculated might be needed for this binding ritual is wildfire, which Qyburn would also have access to as Master of Whisperers. He would definitely be able to go to the Queen and get anything he needs from the pyromancers, or he just has the blanket ability to go and do that, especially if he goes up to the pyromancers and turns on a glass candle. They'd be like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? And all of a sudden him and the pyromancers would be best friends, and they'd be off doing their secret fire magic hidden away in the Red Keep somewhere, which is what the pyromancers are normally doing anyway. The idea behind the wildfire being involved with this ritual just ties back to the fact that Melisandre has her flashback of all of her slave times, basically the patterns being traced on her skin, like the tattoos she's getting when she's being enslaved, Melanie, Lot 7, and then in her flashback paragraph, she remembers drinking in fire. There is fire inside her, searing her and transforming her, and still she drinks it in. Every other religious order, whether it's the Weirwood Paste or the Shade of the Evening, there's always a magic drink. And it would seem very likely that fire magic's going to have a magic drink, and I think that is wildfire. So yes, I am kind of also the drinking wildfire is not that crazy guy, in addition to the there are people and trees in the wall guy. But whether it really includes wildfire or not, it would seem pretty likely that Qyburn has the means and the motive to tie Gregor to a glass candle, assuming that he can in fact find the knowledge to get it working. I would assume he definitely has access to a glass candle and to Gregor, of course. Now, as I said, the motive of just pure curiosity, this is right in line with everything about Qyburn's character, so you don't really need any more levels to make this make sense, in my opinion, but I believe it is part of the Dornish master plan that Qyburn is working with Dorne, so if you buy into that and the Dornish faction wanting to punish Gregor Clegane for what he did, well, having Oberyn poison him with something that kills him very slowly would in fact be a good punishment, but what is even better is taking him in that slow dying state and binding him to a glass candle so that no matter what you do to him, he can't actually die. So if you want to buy into the idea that this is more use of glass candles and use of binding someone into eternal life as a revenge mechanism, it ties in directly again to one of the main things that we have been talking about on this channel in the central thesis of our theory, how we believe the wall was built. So all of it really does kind of tie together thematically if in fact Qyburn is working with the Dornish to enact this revenge on the mountain. It's all sort of a revenge cycle, and this is just one example of how tying someone into an eternal undeath could be a terrible thing to do to them. And to tie it into the idea that I have talked about that I think I might have originated, it was one of the few things that I picked up like in one of my first few read-throughs of these books. It was my first original fan theory that I came up with from only looking at the books, was the connection that, wait a minute, Melisandre says she drank in flame, and Aerion Brightflame thought that drinking in wildfire could make him immortal. Melisandre's immortal. I wonder if there's a connection there. So if we tie in that theory that Aerion Brightflame and potentially Aerys were working with the pyromancers to bind themselves to a glass candle potentially, it would definitely make sense that Qyburn could have picked up the pieces of whatever research they are doing and had whatever missing knowledge was needed to make it work. Right? He has potentially been in contact with Marwyn, or he has just potentially been off doing his own shenanigans and picking up very important bits of information. So if anyone was going to pick up the pieces of this plot to bind someone to a glass candle and actually test it and get it to work, it would probably be Qyburn, and I think that's exactly what we see him doing with the mountain. And it would definitely be quite interesting to discuss the implications if the Undying Ones that we have talked about in other videos are kept in their torturous undying state in the same way that we now believe the mountain could be, but that is going to have to be saved for its own video, so make sure you hit like and subscribe so you don't miss that. But in terms of this theory about the mountain, let me know what you think down in the comments. Is there anything that you can think of that would either refute or add to this idea that perhaps Qyburn has gotten hold of a glass candle and somehow done what George, in one of the unused versions of the prologue, speculates or suggests that glass candles can in fact do? Again, because it is not canon and written out in the books, maybe we can't take it as fully canon just yet, but we can at least know that it was perhaps the idea that George had in mind when he was describing the mountain, when he was talking about how all of this could work. In his head, you know he's got some idea going on there, and I think glass candles might be that. Now, this will definitely not be the last time we talk about glass candles on this channel, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that, but that is all I have for you today. Let me know if you can add anything down in the comments, either adding evidence to this, refuting it, maybe anything about Qyburn that I have missed that could be helpful, and I will see you all with something else very soon.